to many reforms, but of course, many more questions are required to be investigated by younger minds. His paper on people's law is inspiration for this workshop, and we are looking forward to your lecture, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Sanjay. Chancellor Kumar. I'm the Vice Chancellor of the University, Dr. Nish Jaswal, dear participants and friends. I'm very sorry that I could not reach you personally, and I could not come to the workshop. But I'm pleased that with this kind of contraption, we are actually able to see each other, I hope, and we shall be able to talk with each other. So questions and comments are very important. All my learning occurs by interaction. So I do not think I think, therefore I am, but I engage, therefore we are. It's a slight modification to Descartes' famous maxim, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Albert Camus used to say, the great French philosopher and novelist and existentialist, Albert Camus, and his book, The Rebel, by saying, I rebel, therefore we are. Not I think, therefore I am. I rebel, therefore we are. So this is one way of talking about pluralism. I read a correspondence with Chancellor Kumar, and I'm here with you this afternoon by only practicing a jurisprudence of embarrassment. Jurisprudence of embarrassment is one where you do things that you are not inclined to do. I'm not inclined to believe, even at this late stage, in capacity building, for example. Program, not capacity building per se, but capacity building seminars, workshops. But if you're going to hold one, as I said to Chancellor, you have to not take all the themes as major focus. In other words, you take two things, themes, and explore them deeply. In other words, to put still another way, you should look through a microscope rather than a telescope. That's called research. And that's also called, before research came into vogue, it's also called thinking. You can think only if you are not running. If you are not running, you can think slowly. And Nietzsche said somewhere that the only art that a thinker should acquire is to read slowly, not gallop through a particular text or a book, not to run, not to win a race, who finishes it first, but to read infinitely slowly with patience. There used to be a Saibad in the 12th century called Kumarila Bhatt. Kumarila Bhatt was in Kashmir, and there was a great deal of servicism. And he wrote a lot on hermeneutics, interpretation. And one of the phrases he used comes to my mind now. He used the phrase, I'll translate if I can, Saradai Pathak. The reading must be engaged, not distant. Saradai Pathak, in my translation means a soulful reader. Now one can build one's capacity if one is engaged and committed, a soulful reader. And the great French semiologist Roland Barthes, began his book, or mythology, I think, mythologist, began his book by saying that the process of a reader begins only when with the death of the author. Birth of a reader begins with the death of the author. Now this doesn't mean literal death, but figurative death of the author. The idea being that you ingest the text, you become the text, and you become the copy. The soulful reading. Disagree is the matter of choice. Or agree partially or disagree fully, whichever. But you must become the text, you must become the corpus, you must become the genre. Right? So I think capacity building is a lifelong enterprise, not a directed enterprise. It's not an enterprise that you do it for a course requirement, eligibility requirement, because UGC or ICSR says so. These are external reasons. In life of mind, there are no external reasons. They are only internal reasons. All right? Sufficient for the prologue. I want to make about 4 points. And my point number 3 is the largest, more long than any other. So let me start with my first. And legal pluralism had a nasty stroke in 2013. And one of the results of the stroke is, if you survive it, which I did thanks to my wife, Prema, she looked after me very well, and nursed me back to life. I was determined not to be vegetarian. So I somehow began a second life. I lost all my languages. I learned English by reading the school books, elementary school books, CAT, CAT, BAT, BAT, and like that. And one of the residual things about stroke, and it varies, but with me, I cannot pronounce certain words correctly. I can get them right once and 10 times. Now, my favorite word used to be pluralism. Plural. I can't repeat it. So I will say LP. LP stands for legal pluralism. Pluralism. It will save your time and mine if you cooperate in this language game and allow me for the handicap. And be so gracious as to say LP, as to mean by LP, legal pluralism. I don't want to repeat the whole word. Similarly, there is SP, it is social pluralism. There is legal pluralism, there is social pluralism, there is cultural pluralism, there is civilizational pluralism, there is religious pluralism, there is linguistic pluralism, there is ethnic pluralism. So I would say social broadly for all these rolled up things. Each matters, and if we have time, we'll look at them. I, of course, must add here at the outset that pluralism is something that we choose to make out of plurality. There is no such thing as pluralism, which is not a construction of mind, human mind, social mind, collective mind. Constructs the meaning of plurality. Now, the difference between plurality and pluralism pluralism. What is the difference? Pluralism is an ism, like socialism, capitalism, environmentalism, constitutionalism. It's an ism. It's the social meaning that we wish to ascribe to social reality. Plurality is a social reality. Please do get it straight at the beginning. Pluralism, P, sorry, P is what we make of plurality. The P1 is plurality, P2 is pluralism. There can't be P2 without P1. And P1 is an irreducible social fact. At every level, society is plural. Civilization is plural. Language is plural. Ethnicities are ethnicities. Culture is plural. Cultures. There is no one culture. There are many cultures. Culture of science, culture of humanities, culture of arts, culture of the indigenous people, culture of the high caste Hindu, culture of the laboring classes. There is constitutional culture for the Supreme Court saying. So there are many cultures. A plurality is inherent in every society. That's the major point I will explain. We want to construct a pluralism out of this plurality. It's a fact about societies that all human societies have been, are, and will continue to be plural. It's a fact that you cannot do anything about. You can decide what to do with plurality, but you can't eliminate plurality from society. Various attempts have been made. You can increase plurality by policies of inclusion like social diversity, reservations, or anti-discrimination, a number of things are Constitution Article 15, 16, 17 tell you about. So that's one thing. Now second point is a larger point, which I would say has to be handled carefully. It consists of 9 sub-points, and 9 points are in my Canberra workshop paper, which I think you already have, or you will get it from Mrityunjay or Chancellor. Please ask for Canberra workshop paper on pluralism. I find it useful to go back to this piece for several reasons. I wrote in 70s, published in Canberra workshop proceedings. I said many things there. I won't take your time with that. But I'll take your time with the idea of plurality and pluralism. The first thing, point number 1, is there exists a distinction between state and civil society. It's a given social fact. You may want to narrow the role that civil society plays, or you want to expand it. What you do want to do is a matter of opinion. But there are two separate groups in society. Civil society, the social action groups, social movements, social collectivities on one side, and state on the other side. I need not labor this proposition in India for the case. Who wrote the law for Hindus before the state came in? What did Lord Cornwallis do when he decided to adjudicate disputes between two sets of Hindus or two sets of Muslims. Duncan Derrett spent his whole life in explaining this. He called it the Anglo-Hindu law and Anglo-Muhammadan law. This law was given by Rishis and Maulana, followers of the Holy Prophet. They were not given by any state. The notion of custom in Hindu law, it comes as sadachara, and opposite of sadachara is durachara. Sadachara is the custom of the wise, or the custom of the good. Now, what is wise and what is good is a matter of debate. I will not go into that. Point I'm making is simple and stark. That we in India or South Asia or Africa or third world generally do not have to think too much about this. Our law was made by society, by social groups, by seers and sages, by prophets and by religion, and not made by state. State India came when? Amrit Mahotsav is celebrating what 75th year of the Electoral Constitution. But the state came with the idea of empire, with the idea of invasion, the idea of just war. State as a war machine became prominent in late Middle Ages and incipient nation-state phenomenon. Congress, 100 years of Congress, struggle, freedom struggle. The state became an incipient nation. That's a very fine analysis by David Bostrup. David Bostrup studied agrarian reforms in India, and he classifies the idea of state in India from agrarian reform perspective into a colonial state which moves to the idea of incipient nation state. The idea of state came very late to Indian society. The Hindu or Muslim or indigenous are not mentioned, indigenous people, what you call the scheduled caste, the constitution called scheduled tribe, sorry. So I won't labor this point. First point is the distinction always, and the distinction can't be erased between state and civil society. Second, the state is a part of society. State, of course, the legislators come from society. Judges come from this society. Citizens come from this society. The armed forces come from this society. We all come from civil society. But state has one thing which civil society does not have. The state has imperial powers. Imperial powers, I mean nothing more than power of life and death also. What more? What height of power you can command? Accepting capital punishment. End of my life. So the state does have what Max Weber called monopoly of force. Or the state, modern state, another phrase was expropriates this use unto itself. ADR and all these things have become very common today. Alternate dispute resolution, arbitration limit. But the central part is adjudication. And this is a wider topic, I don't go into that. So, force monopoly comes to penal law, while monopoly of violence, which society does not have, or decision to go to war, the executive power, is another state. These powers civil society does not have. It has two powers, power of life and death over citizens, and power to go to war, just war or the start of war or the war. Therefore, the state becomes, in some estimates, more important than civil society. More intolerant, shall we say, of civil society. The state wants to cast civil society in its own image. So there's a struggle between civil society and state. Again, the proportions may vary. Okay? But the struggle is a fact of life. There are states which say any number of activities, don't allow activism. For example, in Ukraine, in Soviet Union, it's a treason now to call war against Ukraine a war. And it can be visited even with death. What does the Russian Federation say? Russian Federation say the special military invasion, not a war against Ukraine. Now you make up your mind what it is. I won't go into international aspects of it, and I won't express opinion on it. I have expressed in the newspaper articles like Indian Express and so on. So the fourth, the third element is the state needs apparatus of social control. That's obvious. That's law. State needs law. In fact, you can't theorize state without theorizing law. State and law hunt together. They are a pair. State articulates its power through law. I suggest very humbly that this is also true for civil society. State does not recognize my law as law. You think of panchayat, caste panchayat. It's real law. You think of khap panchayat. It's real law in a particular area. Go to Himachal, and you don't have to go to Himachal. You're in Himachal. Most of you are in Himachal. Where you can, I just read a book by anthropology by Professor Coker. She depicts how absolutely people's law system works there, it's placed in the state legal system. State legal system does not run. People, in fact, apply for justice to God. I forget the name of the God, but special God to whom petition and live the matter to God, not to faith, to God. Difference between living a matter to faith and living a matter to God. So everybody needs to articulate power through law, whether the state or people's group. I distinguish between state legal system, SLS, and non-state legal system. State legal systems are plural, legislature, executive, judiciary. They have different cultures and court systems. There are many legal systems, not one, that make up Indian legal system. Legislature, executive, but study separation of powers not with this dicey, spicy chap. You must apply your mind what the Constitution says. The Constitution gives supremacy to executive in certain matters, supremacy to legislature in certain matters, and supremacy to judicial power, adjudication in such. What is Article 32? Court may decide wrongly, that's the different matter. But the point is, basically, the division of separation of powers means nothing. It simply means that there is no sovereign power under the Constitution. Keshwanda Bharti clearly said all powers are constituted. By what? By what? By Constitution. And the judiciary will judge which power is out of the line by doctrine of basic study. If I like it or not like it, but the court said. You must study that. The fourth thing that follows, that both NSL and SLS, state legal system and non-state legal systems, have legal order. Whether you like it or not, there is Khap Panchayat functioning, there is the Wasserman Panchayat functioning. There are all kinds of caste panchayat. The sociologists have studied. M.N. Srinivas started his career in 1932 by studying caste among the washermen of Baroda. And panchayat doing justice. And the Supreme Court has recognized that in a number of cases challenging panchayat justice. That is my next point. Supreme Court has said that in Khap Panchayat cases, it has said unless they violate the Constitution, they exist, they have a right to exist. In colonial times, in fact, there was statutory form, Kaji Panchayat, Kaji courts. They made new courts. The Kaji just in Bihar, not other states also. I won't go into it. So, in short, and that's my eighth point, the study in legal pluralism explored the historic mix between NSL and non-state legal system. What you call pluralism is a study of this mix. And the next point is, ideal typically, there are three types of relations between SLS and NSL. One is of antagonism, an antagonistic relation, where the state law seeks to annihilate non-state legal system. The second is cooperation, where the state law is in symbiosis, not really tolerates but actively encourages non-state legal system so that it implements the law better. A number of examples. Third, the non-state legal systems and state legal systems have a symbiotic relation. They don't conflict with each other. They are not antagonistic. They conflict with each other at some point, and they cooperate at other point. That's symbiosis. There's a peaceful kind of uneasy coexistence, state law and non-state law. This is what my general points are. That there is a relative autonomy of this legal function, of the function of plurality, function of lawmaking, function of adjudication, and function of execution. Now, I not elaborate. Now, a quick point, and I'm done. 6 points. My main contention, I'll now open up the field for a short while, 10 minutes or so. Is about power. As I said earlier, power is articulated by state or society. Sometimes, and usually by both, sometimes by both, at least. Take the farmers' agitation. The state said, we will talk with you, but we will not repeal the 3 farm law. You heard last year, you know it. The Supreme Court said they have a right to peacefully assemble and protest. All social groups have rights, but they should not use violence. And inconvenience other people. The Supreme Court ultimately, for the first time in Indian history, the legislation, the farm law, were stayed, so they are brought into operation. That's important. Till we dispose of the matter through an expert committee. So the laws were suspended, held in abeyance. This never happened by a judicial order, speaking order, which you must read. And then the Prime Minister himself announced a repeal. He said more or less, I quoted in somewhere, our Prime Minister himself said, it was a mistake to enact the farm law, and I'll repeat it. And he did repeat it in Parliament by following a proper procedure. What does this show? Interaction between SLS and non-state legal system. A non-state legal system arose out of nowhere, farmers movement. And the effect of repealing 3 laws defended by the government within powers of Parliament, held in abeyance by the Supreme Court, and repeat. This never happened elsewhere, I think. You might know better. So my main point is that distribution and management of power, that law articulates power of the state. Today, Justice Kanwar led a bench which held the Money Laundering Act, all the draconian provisions of it today. I was reading it just before I came to you. I'm not reading judgments still. But essentially, the ability to all the legislative provisions, including ED and all that, through the Supreme Court has blessed the draconian provisions of the Money Laundering Act and held it valid against all challenges. So my main concern is that, and civil society at the same time, there are nationwide protests against a national leader being squeezed by enforcement directly. Civil society. Very often you have difficulty with classification. When political parties get involved, whether in non-state legal system or state legal system, it's a matter of detail. Now, John Rawls suggested in his book, Last Law of the People, very short book, in which his thesis was that international law is law of peoples, normatively speaking. It's not a law of states, into which I would not go. But he reaffirmed his idea there, which is of relevance to us. And law of peoples. Excuse me. He reaffirmed the idea that there should be, quote unquote, reasonable pluralism. Now there are 3 roles. Roles number 1 is the roles of theory of justice. It's in 1971 or 72. Then roles of political liberalism. Another book written by Rawls number 2. And for me, Rawls number 3 is law of the people. And Rawls number 1 said one major thing, that justice is an ontological matter. justice is a virtue of social life. Theory of justice. In political, in urban justice is a metaphysical virtue for all human beings in societies. In political liberalism, in one sentence, he said justice is not a metaphysical virtue, but a political virtue. He rises out of politics to understand how politics work. The third book, he says reasonable pluralism. Or what is reasonable? That's the big question. We have a Sanskrit saying, I think it comes from Veda in Hinduism. It is called Tunde Tunde Matir Binna. Remember that? Tunde Tunde, with each mind, each head, Mati, opinion, differs. With each human head, the opinion differs. So thousands of ways. So naturally, what is RP, reasonable pluralism, is a matter of debate. What you might consider reasonable is not reasonable to another person. This is the same when you come to state law, and the same when you go to non-state law. Reasonable, what is reasonable pluralism? It is decided by Karnataka High Court in hijab case, and in Supreme Court now there is a appeal. It might decide different. So Rawls had an idea that yes, reasons might vary, but something ultimately emerges as final. And he had the idea of constitutional essentials. The judicial review is one of the constitutional essentials because it negotiates various reasons. It makes what he called overlapping consensus, areas of agreement out of disagreement. He called it overlapping consensus. Overlapping consensus is only possible by this. Rawls 2 also said, but Rawls 3 makes it more clear. Overlapping consensus gives that to certain principles, certain agreement. Now, the final one, and I leave for comments and questions. So far, so good. You have constitutional essentials, you have overlapping consensus, therefore you have reasonable pluralism. What do you do when agencies of the state think differently among themselves? And when agencies of state put together on one side and civil society put on the other side, think differently. Where do you get this? Now, first area is very important. And you saw it Sabrimala. In Sabrimala, what time is running by, so I'll be very brief. In Sabrimala, as you know, there are three notions: CM, PM, and PCM. You know that? For teaching itself, teaching the subject. CM stands for constitutional morality. Morality. Constitutional morality. CM. Not a political reference to CM and PM. PM stands for public morality. And PCM stands for pre-constitutional morality. It is a judgment. I dare not use the abbreviation, but I told the Justice now, I wrote about it, that I'll call it, it makes it easy to call it CM, PM, and PCM. Now, what are they? Can constitutional morality override legislative morality? Answer was clear in up to the Sabrimala case. Now it is all from the left of court, Supreme Court Justice. The reference to 9 judges bench, whenever it happens, I'm not bothering you. Take the decisions on Jor case, not the case on LGBT, gay sex. The Attorney General and the Solicitor General said to the court in Jor case, we leave it to your wisdom, Your Lordship. The executive had a different view on gay sex, but didn't tell us. We leave it to your wisdom. The case was decided on concession. Concession can be drawn anytime, by the way. So that's a postural difference. Legislative morality. Read down the provision in the IPC as Nas did. The difference between the High Court and the case in the Supreme Court where Justice Sanghvi, judgment, I forget the name, very overruled the High Court.
Suresh Kumar Kausal versus Nas Boundary. Suresh Kumar Kausal.
Thank you. And then came, suddenly, then the matter court went to curative petition. Curative petition was never heard. Your case was heard. I told Justice Deepak Bishop, this is quite unfair. Just if one person happens to receive justice and you're the prerogative, you can't take the case from the curative bench or similar case. You can't pick up your cases and decide. The ideal thing is that the curative petition run its course. We have filed one for Bhopal victims. Now it is 12 years. Our turn has never come. We still obey justice. All right? Anyway, this is not a discussion on constitution, but it's reasonable pluralism, RP. Sexual minorities. The very recent judgment giving 10 directions of the Supreme Court on sex works being legal. Very last week. And the very recent judgment this week by Justice Dhananjay Chandrachud. He wrote this judgment on abortion being given every 24 months as a matter of reproductive human right to a live-in relationship. But it's not a marriage, nothing to do with marriage. I agree with the outcome. But many people would not. So what is the role of constitutional morality in fashioning reasonable pluralism? An open question. And in which just now for review, in which CM and PM everybody knew, but this woman judge, Indu Malhotra, Justice Indu Malhotra, filed an agreement, but was a dissent in Supreme Court, if you read it carefully. And she said, I'm agreeing that CM can personally write PM. But what about PCM, pre-constitutional morality? Before the Constitution was even contemplated. And she refers to Swami Vivekananda's answer. And her view was that you cannot, a social action litigation or public interest litigation cannot be filed by a person outside the religious group challenging the morals of the religious. It has to be only a person belonging to that community, religious community, who can file. Supreme Court cannot legislate, but it can decide a controversy or a dispute. And of course, she does not disagree with the so-called majority in Sabrimala, but she raises PCM. Does CM include all PCM? Should CM include all PCM? Whose M is CM? Is Parliament not capable of expressing CM and PCM? These are important issues of fashioning reasonable pluralism. It should be reasonable, more than reasonable for me to end here. But I must say that I have not done justice to the area because that is not possible. I've founded a few themes and I've concentrated on constitutional pluralism, please, not other kinds of pluralism. Constitutional pluralism differs from ideological pluralism. It differs from political party pluralism. It differs from legislative pluralism. Constitutional pluralism is an area which elaborates with reasons, job of the jurists and judges, lawyers and judges and jurists, by which I mean law academic, to develop a doctrine of reasonable pluralism. The constitutional pluralism in India is judicially constructed reasonable pluralism. But legislature and executive might have different views of it. But that somebody has to be final. Therefore, the idea of constitutional essentials and the basic structure of the Constitution come back again. Is this within, is it open to debate or it is foreclosed by the final decision of the court? And the issue of power relationship between civil society and state come to the fore. Thank you very much. I will be guided solely by your comments and questions. I hope we have a good discussion. And please be clear and in your comments. I hand over the floor to Chancellor or Murtanda, as the case may be.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I would like to invite questions from the participants. Yes. So I have a question to start with. You said that there is a relationship of power. The power is there in non-state legal system as well as a state legal system. So is the power what you are talking about is a value, power as a value, and there is a relationship of power between a state and non-state aspects of our life, or is there any other values apart from power which is in a dialectical relationship between a state and non-state legal system?
Okay, a very absorbing comment. The man called Michel Foucault, whom all of you must know by name. And Foucault was unusual in the sense that he never described power negatively. Of course, power was constitutive, he said. Before it was repressive, or before it was emancipatory. Let me come back to it. Power has both a repressive phase and an emancipatory phase. He did not use the word emancipatory. He said a dominating force and dominance, and a constitutive, that's the word, constitutive power constitutes subjects who will render obedience to law or to authority. So power, he said, never to never forget, is not always negative. Power can be positive, constitutive. And I think I've used this idea later in my later work very heavily, saying that the law is a mistake to think, and Herbert Hart, who never read Foucault, I'm sorry to say, but Churchill Hart, in his concept of law, said a similar thing. 1961, personally. He described a category in criticism Austin, habit of obedience. He said habit of obedience does not explain the entire legal system or the system of rules. No doubt, criminal law system, if there is one existence, or criminal law per se, is a situation of command of the gunman. Do or die, do or this punishment. But there is contract law, there is wills law of wills, there is arbitration law, there is a tort law, voluntary non-fit injury, all kinds of law. He said certain laws are facilitative. They facilitate conduct. Criminal law obstruct conduct. That's the function of criminal. When you make something offense, you prohibit that activity. So I agree with you. I agree with you that when you take a Hartian approach or you take a Foucauldian general approach, Foucault was more about micro power, power that capillary power, power that operates on your skin, power with a small p. Somebody described the late capitalism and now neoliberalization, something. We call it late capitalism as a system of hyper profit and infra power. I'm talking infra power. Power, subcutaneous power. Power that makes you, power to declare you as mad or as vagrant. Power to declare you as beggar. I often told my students when I was teaching, if you look at me, I always a vagrant. I'm no visible. Vagrant is defined as a person with no visible means of support. So I don't want to be arrested as an activist. Under the Vagrancy Act, police can arrest me even till today on the ground that I have no visible means of support. I have to prove it that I have visible means of support in a court of law. This is the law under which we live by. Not making up. So therefore, power is no doubt repressive, or total, or demanding, whatever it is. And power is constitutive, facilitative. It makes us, all of us, from colonial subjects to citizens. That's the power of the Constitution. We're all co-citizens, you and I, and the Supreme Court judge, and the legislature. Somewhere I described in one of my next articles, I said, what's the Constitution? It's a congregation of co-citizens. You are a citizen, I'm a citizen. A conversation, a meeting among citizens. That's what a Constitution is. A Constitution is a meeting of minds of citizens. So, yes, you're right. Not all power is bad or repressive. Quite a lot of power is constitutive. So how does legal pluralism take into account the constitutive nature of power? how do relationship between SLS and NLS take this into account? And you provide the answer by saying it's a dialectical relationship. It is studied through history, through time. It's not a yes or no relationship. It's a to and fro relationship. Sometimes I agree. Sorry for this length of response, but this is what I have to say. Thank you for query. I think more about it.
Yes, sir. Neha is asking question. Neha is asking question that can a uniform public morality be imagined in a pluralistic society, and how
Sorry,
does the state reconcile if the public morality?
slowly.
Okay, sir. Neha is asking, can a uniform public morality be imagined in a pluralistic society? And how does the state reconcile if public morality of SLS and NLS are in conflict? If there is conflict of public morality between SLS and non-SLS, how a state reconcile those conflicting aspects?
Yes, so far as this is a very good comment. It depends on how you wish to define morality or even ethics, or whether you want to dictate morality and ethics. Some people don't nowadays. They speak of everyday ethics. They are the facile in English, the Frenchman. They are the Didier Facile has developed this morality of every day, not supramorality called ethics. That people who disagree with the idea of ethics and they say all we have is morality. There are people who say that morality is individual, ethics is social, different level. That will disagree. But I think obviously most NSLS deal with matters of morality. After all, what is the objection to carpenter? It takes the prohibition of Sagota marriage very, very seriously. It regards a caste offense punishable in exile or whatever. It takes intermarriages, some of them, not all, very seriously. Elopement, very seriously. And this is their morality. The constitutional morality, as interpreted by judiciary, is that women are equal to men. That biology is not destiny. That personal is the political. The constitutional morality that challenges public morality, as expressed by NSLS, is heads on different. The NSLS is based on discrimination between man and woman in this particular case. Where the Constitution is premised on equality. Non-discrimination. So very often you will find the non-state legal system in matter of study in each field. It is not to generalize, but the morality is, let us say, pre-constitutional PCM, to use Hindu Malhotra, Justice Hindu Malhotra's phrase. It's PCM. What do I do with PCM? We can understand CM cancelling PM. Can we understand CM cancelling PCM? Because they're different morality. Now, what is constitutional morality is a good question. I do not propose to approach it today. It's so good. One view is that constitutional morality is what the legislature thinks it is. Many critics of NAS, for example, said this, and Professor M.P. Singh, for example, my colleague, in a writing in a National Law School Journal, he said this is better for the legislature. Many people think this is what is representative of people, not for judges. So they support Kosha against NAS. Many other people think, well, if the constitutional morality is in conflict with the social group morality, then it's a precedent, it's a priority. It commands almost an ontological priority, being a constitutional essential. It's not judges' view that matter, mind you. Not judges' view, but society. A bench's view against society. No. It is judges' interpretation of the Constitution. And a reasoned interpretation. Like an argument on both sides there. Have you ever wondered, Nehal, this is the only field in life have you ever come across this extraordinary idea that you should hear arguments in public before coming to a decision? That you should write a reasoned judgment stating facts, arguments, and reasons for a judgment? That this should be always published and preserved for eternity? No, you worship somebody, you don't write reasons for it. You don't hear the other side. But faith, when you fall in love, you don't do all these things. You don't write, whereas I fell in love with this day, with this woman and this man, and whereas he or she is very nice. Give you reasons. Out of so many people of the same sex, I selected him or her for this and that reason, and therefore I decided to fall in love. You don't. One doesn't do it. It's very unnatural. And Lord Coke said long time back in 16th century to James I in common law. James I was a tyrant and he said, no judges, parliament is sovereign. Sip money case. And Lord Coke, I think, said the Chief Justice. And he said, my lord, everybody in the realm owes you allegiance to the king. And your command always reason. Your command is a command. Yes, that's the. But my lord, law has an artificial reason of its own. And by this reason, judges have to go. Doctrine of precedent, stare decisis, is artificial reason. Where else do you find stare decisis? In market, in legislation, in state? No. Following past precedents is not a virtue. In politics, you don't require 10th schedule with precedent for the requirement of political conduct. So it's a very different. So artificial reason, I think, is of law against political reason, against popular reason. After all, Brexit case, the British Supreme Court ruled a 24 pages judgment. You would have taken 300 pages or 10,000 pages. I don't know. It takes 1,000 pages, not 10,000. But the Lordship said that this can't be decisions made by the executive. The whole Parliament should decide whether Britain should leave. What does the referendum mean? Whether Britain should leave the European Union. And the whole Parliament to consider it. And then they did what they did. Artificial is why? You already had a referendum. Who are these fellows saying it? The answer is we are bound to follow the artificial wisdom. Whether they cook, they remember, they read again, I don't know. But that's a tradition. That lowest reason is unnatural, artificial. And artificial morality is a prime example and its collision course with public morality and even pre-constitutional morality. And between you and me now, I think it's a damn good thing. I personally think it's a very good thing. As it may be wrong here and there, but it's a considerable achievement to develop this notion as a rule of decision. As we develop this notion as a judicial rule of decision. This is the important part. It might go wrong. Sabrimala women themselves said the judges should not allow women to enter the country. Consider it now. In 1 month after Sabrimala, there was a giant Abhishek case in Madhya Pradesh, Digambar Jayanti. And while women were allowed to watch every other part of the Lord, they could not watch one part of it, which was covered because of various reasons. And the High Court said, what is wrong with it? There is no gender inequity. And women themselves did not object. At Hindu Bharata's point, women worshippers did not object. How can a third party to a dispute? There is a dispute about it on the grounds of constitution. So constitutional morality does not enter. It respects your preferences of the religious people. It is not a free-for-all doctrine. But wait for the larger bench decision. I don't know what they will do. But I think Justice Malhotra had a point. Small point, but important. Which can be critical for. But just think through these cases. All the sexual morality cases, Sabrimala, and all these cases, gay sex cases, and sex worker cases, and decide for yourself what kind of reasons you urge to prohibit this activity and to decriminalize it. And what role can morality command over you and the constitution? That's a very important question.
Sir, the next question, I'm Chanchal. Sir, you're one of the earlier theory that constitution as a state formative, constitution as a site for state formative practices. How in this, as per that theory, if we apply, if we look upon reasonable plurality, a possibility of emergence of a reasonable pluralism or legal pluralism, can it really work? Is it possible that reasonable plurality can emerge, where different groups are trying to form or supply a particular content to the present state, and it's an ongoing process? Find the basis or foundation for all those arguments or struggles are is constitution or constitutional provisions.
Well, a different issue. I forget the name of the author. I think it begins with S. He's done a very interesting book on global legal pluralism and inaugurates a new branch of studies. A very worthwhile book for people interested in pluralism to read. Now, what is global legal pluralism? Here we are worried about constitution. Human rights is global legal pluralism in action. Whether put binding violates international law. It's a Chinese and Japanese custom of women. They should bind their feet. It should be such smaller than male man. Or the female genital mutilation. Take example, they all held to be violating Article 6 of the Zero Convention. I don't think that this is mentioned by, in particular by the author, but it doesn't matter. If you take a general idea of global legal pluralism, I would suggest the role that is performed by the world's constitutional morality is performed by human rights internationally. When you say states are not sovereign, but they are under the law, which law are the states under? Law they agreed to be bound in terms of international law. So, in a sense, so far I understand your anxiety. Pluralism has to be both reasoned and reasonable. Just by saying X practice is discriminatory, it doesn't become discriminatory. You must have reason to say why it is discriminatory. There's a hijab case in India coming up in the Supreme Court. If it is not come, you have to come correct me, of course. So there have to be normative grounds of saying why this is discriminatory. The normative grounds of why it is not discriminatory is given by the petitioner or respondent. Okay. You cannot simply go by subjective preferences. You can't say this is a morality of the non-state legal system, because here is a case of conflict between morality of the state legal system and non-state legal system. So, for the lack of any further elaboration, I would simply say there's a valid anxiety. State formative practices was invented by, Buxy-Moron, like oxymoron.
At some point of time, everyone is, sorry,
Buxy-Moron it's a Buxy-Moron. 2000 article in the Cardozo law.
Yeah.
Formative practices. I have not read it, of course, a long time ago. But essentially, I remember I was discussing with Kenneth Cards and
It is and just right.
yeah, and there I discussed one aspect of it, and that is human rights. And the rise of the what is called in political science, democratic recession. The global democratic recession, liberal democratic recession, has given rise to another. I'm talking on my feet instantly on this. One has now begin to think of state, think of Trump. Do not say state formative practice. You have to think something other. So I suggest state deformative practice. What is the difference between state formative practices and state deformative practices? State deformative practices, again think aloud, are practices which depart from the Constitution as interpreted by judges and by the original text. Is the abortion decision of the Supreme Court of America overruling Roe v. Wade a state formative practice or a state deformative practice? everyone on one's own on this matter. I know universal answer. But if you go by normativity of human rights, the CEDAW, the Women's Convention, clearly says, forget the article, but the spacing, the number and of children shall be a woman's decision. It is written in the convention, which is subscribed by almost all the state parties. So it will become binding international law. So normativity, as expressed by binding agreements of majority of most of all the states, has to be taken into account. It is not your subjectivity which determines normativity. Of course, it does play a part. But there is something called outside. And outside they've decided, including Arab states, including Islamic states, on the spacing of number of children. Whether they actually observe it is another matter. There are reservations to study all that. But basically, you have to examine this aspect of reformative practices. Reformative practices are those which you measure by the constitutional interpretation by standards by which constitutional morality is judged. Now, if a decision stood for 50 years, allowing women, a federal law, allowing women the procreative rights, to simply overrule a precedent of 50 years standing. And I wrote about this in Indian Express again, very recently, called Abortion Rights article, in which I focus on Justice Clarence Thomas's decision. And he goes beyond his own majority. 7 judges decided. And he said, since privacy was nowhere mentioned in the original text of the Constitution, the originalist, this court will have to revisit all the decisions in which privacy is mentioned on sexual freedom. He mentions those gay sex, third gender decision, everything. Now, is it state formative practice or deformative practice? I leave it to you. I'm just not thinking aloud. But state formative practices in the context of Cardo's article that really meant that time there was no idea of deformative practice. My own product now. But it's a difficult distinction. Both Russia's invention, Russian Federation invasion of Ukraine, state formative or state deformative. It depends on your judgment. And either side, but judgment has to be totally decent. There are many people who say it is deformative in my terms now. So it's difficult to relate to pluralism without drawing a value distinction between formative and deformative. That's what I would say.
Yes, sir. Sir, only last point, last question. You said that when we talk about pluralism, it is reasonable pluralism. The word reasonable. And reasonable has civilizational values. That civilizational values are antithetical to feminist movement, third world countries. So, as you wrote in that particular paper, state formative practices, and demonstrated what is the meaning of civilization. So, from that perspective, what is reasonable is again a very pluralistic idea. What is reasonable? And when we hegemonize the very idea of reasonable from the perspective of West, from the perspective of Eurocentrism in words of Derrida, then naturally the very idea of pluralism is destroyed. So both are living in a very antagonistic relationship, the pluralism and reasonability in that sense. So what is your comment on that?
Good insight again. What is civilization? A number of questions there. You begin by asserting, an empirical claim about importance of civilizations in South Asia or Asian countries. And then you went to relate it to reasonable pluralism. In political science, there's a whole theory, particularly after the book called The Clash of Civilization, which I rarely recommend to people, my colleagues and my students. One man, Huntington, whose name I do not normally mention, but there was a book which was written in the wake of war on terror. The thing of past for many of you, it never happened. You are not born in that period. But some others were, and they know what happened. But forget it. Now he saw this conflict as a war between religion and secularism. In the discourse on this book has died out over the last 20 years, but its residues remain. But my point was that in political science, there is risen recently a revival of this idea of civilizational state. Civilizational state. That we are not only nation states, right? We are a civilization. China started first. China said, I'm not merely a nation state, I'm not merely a post-colonial state, I'm a civilizational state. I go back 5,000 years. India followed it. And then many other states, and then political scientists began thinking about it. Now, as a law teacher, political science is not my discipline, but dabble, as you rightly, thank you for introducing me. I rightly dabble into all areas. I absolutely justified because unless I dabble, I can't leave political science behind when I study law, and that's why I introduced this so-called, which has now become pre-law courses in 5-year course. So now, my dear, integrated course of my dear implies what happened is a pre-law and law, and therefore the law teacher never taught the social sciences, humanities, and vice versa. It's absurd. It's apartheid anywhere is wrong. It resulted into apartheid. So 10 plus 2 plus 5 was a disaster at that standpoint. There are some law schools that are exceptions. So I would say that as a law teacher, I have no quarrel with the idea of civilization state. I think both India and China and many others can claim a civilization status. In fact, I was searching on something recently, and I found official languages in India and how Schedule 8 progressed from 5 languages to 21 languages, 23 languages now. But I discovered that apart from constitutional additions to 8th schedule, the Ministry of Culture has issued certain guidelines on this very point about ancient languages. Notion of this status. I not looked at the guidelines, that's my next protocol, but you kindly look in the guidelines says 1,000-year-old tradition in order to get the status of classical language. Both Tamil and Sanskrit are thousands of years old, and some people say Tamil came first, I'm not a linguist, and then came Sanskrit. Or some people go far to say that Tamil is Proto-Sanskrit, and Sanskrit came later. I'm not going into this controversy. Now, by that resolution, many languages are ruled out. They're not 1,000-year-old classical languages. There are very few classical languages that the ministry recommends by its own criteria. Right? Look at it. So, in measuring civilization, the first question is how old you must be in order to count as civilization. I still remember, and I remember till my dying day, a conversation I had in phone. I'd gone to Texas, in Austin in Texas, for some South Asia seminar. And I got a telephone call from somebody at 8 o'clock. And he said it was the director of American Civilization Studies Institute. I just was rubbing my eyes and I said, Professor so-and-so, good morning. It's very good that you're director of this place. But what do you want me to do? He said, want to come and address us staff and students. I said, glad that you come. But you must answer me one question of mine. I know later on, in retrospect, I realized it was very rude and impertinent of me, but it was deadly accurate as well. I said, sir, please tell me, what do you mean by American civilization? At that time, American Constitution had not celebrated the bicentennial, the 200 years. So he said, American civilization, you mean indigenous civilization of Iroquois and other tribes, Sioux and that? No, American civilization. Then I asked him, I said, sir, can you tell me how can a country less than 200 years have a civilization? Now, for me, it was a natural question, but it points to a scientific. Why can't a country less than 200 years old have civilization? So, first reservation I have against talking about civilizational states is this. How do we periodize? Where do we begin to mark the rise of a civilization? Because if you take human rights and liberalism, America and anti-slavery right, anti-discrimination right, America was the first after French Revolution, more successful than that, to inaugurate pluralism. After 100 years, the Civil War occurred, and there was as you know, all that American history. After American War of Independence with Lincoln. Why can't they have a civilization? Where do you date the rise of liberal civilization? Enlightenment in Europe or with American civilization? So one question is, I'll be short now. The second worry is not solve that worry, and I want to look forward to your help. Is the thesis of some political scientists that because I'm a civilizational state, the obligations and limitations on my power of the nation state shall not apply. I'm putting it up there. That nation state is a lower conception. Civilizational state is a higher conception. If I'm a sovereign with limited powers in nation state, then as a civilization state, I have civilization powers. Now that's what it is. Now this is what led to colonization. and conquest of the so-called third world. They all claim civilization on the famous boast of British was that we have come to give the gift of law to India. India had no law. All I talk about non-state legal system, India had no law. Britishers gave sense of law. And there are many Indians who believe in that. There are many Indians today, lawyers and judges who believe that we got our law from Britain. They say, children of Bezatiti, Manu, Parashara. अरे वे लोग कहाँ से है वहां से है कि यहाँ से सदी तक यहाँ जीते थे वो लोगों का पीपल्स लॉ था तो आप कहे तो ब्रिटिश ने हमको लॉ दिया ये कहाँ से तो आई थिंक the problem is concept of civilization status we work with some limits. We should not put the nation state and the constitution as secondary. No doubt, nation state is a European concept, emerged in Europe. But we fought for 100 years to make India independent. And we fought against recolonization, the Cold War. And we did not, we fight for our rights today. We may not succeed, but we continue to fight. So, essentially, I would say that it requires some care. You cannot say a civilizational state is not a nation. It is a nation state under the eye of international law. Every state is sovereign. Nobody can aggress on us. Why? Because we are a nation state with authority, our flag, our anthem. So you can't say externally we are sovereign state, but internally we are a civilization state. To the extent that constitution does not matter for any worthwhile purpose. That's wrong. That's worrying. It's not wrong. That we have to think carefully. Otherwise, I'm all for the idea of civilization state. But for within this promise, civilization, we civilize it. We don't have to be Judeo-Christian. We don't have to be Confucian. We have all people, and we can draw sustenance from our spirituality and so on. They can do that. Our religions. Religion, you see, just a final word. The great thinkers of Western social theory, Emil Durkheim, Max Weber, Karl Marx, and many others, always regarded three things as very important means of social control and social change. What were these three means? First, they said religion. Second, they said education. And third, they said law. Religion, education, and law. The last book by Durkheim was on professional ethics and civic morals. Education. Similarly for Marx, education, the masses, for liberation. So, the three agencies of change and control: religion, education, and law. What we've done in India, I wrote a book called The Crisis of Indian Legal System, way back, before we were born. But do kindly read it if you are not. The only book on the subject. And still valid, although things have changed in detail. Somewhat. And I revised it because we revised a book called The Crisis of Indian Legal System. Requires a considerable courage. I did not have the courage. How can you revise and rewrite a book called The Crisis of Indian Legal System? Anyway, in that book, I said essentially That is the structural impasse. You have more, I use Habermas' notion of crisis, where he said you have fewer opportunities to solve the problem. Structural conditions to solve the problem that you experience. There are fewer opportunities. Then the problem is crying out for the solution, but you don't have the means to solve it. That's the crisis. So in a sense, we are at a crisis point, and crisis is an opportunity for regeneration in some cases, like the body and so on. And sometimes it is a structural, non-negotiable impasse. You have to live with it. You have to embody this crisis. Crisis becomes embodied in the life of citizens. So I think I've overstretched myself. I will not. If it confuses you, so much the better.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for this wonderful lectures. And we have learned so many great things in today's lectures. Thank you so much.
Sir, this is Chanchal. The mistakes I committed, all these things, I have one request in October. For only one point, I will request to you to come to Shimla, sir, for 3 days. And there will be only one point to talk about. I will be writing in a week that is about lawyering and pro bono sort of thing.
Well, let's see how it goes. I don't wish you best of luck. And
Thank you, sir.
but the saying of the Bard of Evan is Falstaff. So John Falstaff was his character. He said in one of his plays, he used a phrase which I still remember. He used a phrase called "the appetite grows on what it feeds on."
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye. All the best.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.